Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into the show. Got a good show for you here today, guys. I'm going to be talking to you guys about how to win every trade in fantasy. Now, I see a lot of content on YouTube about, who to go after in the trade market and who to sell high on and, all this stuff. And that's great. It's great to know, who you want to go after in the trade market, who you want to get rid of and everything like that. But I just don't see enough content on, how to actually execute these trades. So I wanted to give you guys kind of like a trading course today on like how to actually execute trades in fantasy and how to win trades consistently. So I'm going to get right into it, guys. But real quick, if you have not already, make sure to sub to the channel. If you do find yourself watching my videos and you find my videos helpful, please do subscribe to the channel because it's going to help me out significantly. And I'm going to be with you guys season and off season to help you guys win your leagues. So if you want to sub to the channel, it's going to benefit us both greatly. Appreciate it. All right, guys, I'm going to get right into my first step on my list to win every trade in fantasy. And that is to always base trades on your current roster construction. Let me give you guys an example, okay? I am a running back biased person when it comes to fantasy football, right? So you might ask the question, would I trade Kenneth Walker for Travis Kelce, right? And the short answer to that is no, I wouldn't. I would rather hold on to a super elite running back than a super elite tight end. But in one of my leagues, I am 5 deep at running back. I have Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, and Kenneth Walker on my team. So somebody that was weak at running back came to me, and they offered me Travis Kelce for Kenneth Walker, and I accepted the trade immediately without even thinking about it because the fact of the matter is I was weak at pass catcher and so deep at running back that I couldn't even play Kenneth Walker every week. So in most scenarios, I would say no to that trade, but based on my roster construction, I accepted the trade because I needed pass catchers, and I couldn't even get Kenneth Walker on the field every week. So, when you're trying to figure out trades in fantasy and whether or not they're going to work for your team, make sure to base it on your roster construction and not just which player has more overall value. Next on my list is you want to pay attention to the strength of schedule and the bye weeks for the rest of the season. Now, I talked about this in a video that I made last week. When you're trading for a player, it's extremely important to pay attention to the strength of schedule they have for the rest of the season. You can simply go through, look at them on the fantasy app and go through the app and look through who they play for the rest of the season. And if they have a lot of really tough matchups, you might want to avoid trading for that player. And on top of this, if they haven't had their bye week yet, know that their value drops significantly. Significantly. That 1 week changes how many overall expected fantasy points they're going to get for the rest of the year in a tremendous way. And it makes it to where trading for them is a lot less beneficial because you're going to have them on your bench. And if you're in a situation where you really need to win out from most of your games for the rest of the season, that player being on your bench can cost you. So make sure that if you are trading for a player that has their bye week ahead of them, make sure they are a very, very good player that will absolutely go off in most weeks besides that week that they're on their bench, because if they haven't had their bye week yet, their value drops significantly. So make sure to be paying attention to the strength of schedule that player has for the rest of the season and whether or not they've had their bye week. I'm not saying to completely avoid them if they have a tough strength of schedule or if they have a bye week, but there are very few players that you actually want to trade for if they have a tough schedule and a bye week ahead of them. So make sure to pay attention to that before clicking yes to a trade. Next player on my list is you want to know who you're trading against, right? Because there are certain players in fantasy leagues that they won't even check their app, right? You'll offer a trade and they won't even check to see if what you've offered them because they only check their lineup on game day before they set their lineup for the week. So, you've got to know, is this a player that's actually going to check their app? Is this a player that actually understands the value of the trade I'm offering them? Because just going through rosters in your league and offering trades to people that, you don't even know if they're going to check their app. You don't even know how they're going to perceive the trade that you offer them based on, what they know about fantasy. Well, it kind of makes it harder to trade against them. So make sure that, either you're in contact with these guys, you can shoot them a text, make sure that, they actually see the trade that you offer them, and also make sure that they actually understand the value of the trade, at least to a degree. So that way, they actually have a chance of accepting the trade based on whether or not it's going to benefit them. So, I'm not saying go over and try to rip these guys off, but, make sure that they're at least a player that's going to understand the value of the trade that you're offering them. Next on my list is I don't want you guys to ever trade position players for quarterbacks unless it's Josh Allen, okay? As polarizing as the quarterback position has been this year, at the end of the day, running backs and wide receivers are still significantly more valuable, and they're going to be so down the stretch. Jalen Hurts yesterday is a perfect example. People see him as having so much fantasy value, and he does. Jalen Hurts is great for fantasy, but, he only got 19 fantasy points last night. And a lot of quarterbacks, even the best quarterbacks in fantasy, are going to have a lot of weeks where they just still put up average fantasy performances. The only exception to this is Josh Allen. So know that if you're going to trade a difference-making player at the running back position or a difference-making player at the wide receiver position, you should really only do this if it's to trade for Josh Allen. Outside of that, the quarterback position just isn't valuable enough in comparison to running back and wide receiver to actually justify trading a stud position player for a stud quarterback. Next on my list is I want you guys, and I've already talked about paying attention to the strength of schedule for the rest of the season, but more specifically, I want you guys to pay attention to the playoff strength of schedule. Because if you're trying to compete for a championship and you're trying to execute a trade for a player and you grab a player that has a really tough playoff strength of schedule, it's going to kind of skew their fantasy value, right? Like we have 4 weeks of the fantasy playoffs in most leagues. And if 3 out of 4 of those players' matchups are really tough, or all of their matchups are really tough throughout the entirety of the fantasy playoffs, you've got to know that their value drops tremendously. So, if you go over to your app and you see that they have a really tough schedule to finish off the season, especially when it comes to the playoffs, you might want to avoid trading for that player, because you want players in the playoffs that have smash matchups throughout the entirety of the fantasy playoffs and aren't going against extremely tough defenses. So make sure to pay very close attention to not only the strength of schedule for the rest of the season, but more specifically, the strength of schedule for the playoffs when trading for that player. Next on my list is I want you guys to at least keep in mind that some of the really good teams are going to have players on bye, or not on bye, but players on their bench in the final week of the season. Like, for example, like the Bills or the Chiefs. There's a chance that, players on these teams that are elite fantasy studs, Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen, Pat Mahomes, are not even playing in the final week of the season because their team has already clinched the bye week. So really, really good teams that have a chance of, clinching the bye week early, they might not be playing their guys in the final week of the season. So make sure to understand that, some of these guys might be on the bench in the final week of the season. So, I'm not saying don't trade for these guys, but keep in mind that they might not be available for the second game of your fantasy championship series. So at least keep that in mind when making a trade for a player. Next and final thing on my list is I want you guys to try to avoid making 2-for-1 trades in most situations and to always avoid 3-for-1 trades. Now, this is one of the more complicated concepts when it comes to trading in fantasy football. But a big reason for this is because 2-for-1s, what they do is they kind of make you seem desperate for a trade. And if you offer 2 players for 1 player, it automatically makes the player that you're offering the trade think, hey, this player that he's trying to get must have some sort of value that I'm not thinking about because he's offering me 2 players for 1. So, this player might be way more valuable than I think he actually is. And then they're going to be less likely to trade that player because you're essentially building hype in that player by offering him 2 players for 1. So I really wouldn't try to do 2-for-1s. On top of this, if the player that you're trading for gets injured, then you're giving up 2 probably pretty good players off your bench, assuming you're trading for a really good player, for a player that then in turn gets injured. So you're giving up significant depth off of your roster for now nothing because the player that you're trading for got hurt. And then when it comes to 3-for-1s, well, guys, 3-for-1s are even worse because that definitely makes you look desperate. If you offer 3 players for 1, it makes it seem like, the player that you're trading for is so good that you would offer the world to grab them. And then it immediately makes the player that you're offering the trade think twice about wanting to trade the player that you're offering them. So I would really avoid 3-for-1s. And on top of that, you're just giving up way too much depth off of your roster, no matter how good the player it is that you're trading for when you're giving up 3 players off of your roster for just 1 player. So I would avoid 2-for-1s in most scenarios and 3-for-1s in all scenarios. So, all right, guys, those are my tips to winning trades consistently in fantasy. Hope this video helped. Catch you later.